late Sunday night. I wanted to give a update on where we're at with this project. You can see it looks a lot different than it did in the last video. I've done a lot of cleanup work. So I've got the transmission stripped down to cast for the most part. There's still some old Prairie Gold on there that is probably going to live there forever, but for the most part it's stripped down to where I want it. You can see I've pulled the brakes apart, got that all cleaned up, and that's the last part that needs to go back on the tranny here. The transmission, so I went through the fork positioner for the transmission, rebuilt that, so that's done. I've got new detents and detent balls in. I did want to highlight the shifter here, so I have a picture, but at the top of this, whoever owned this before me had a giant ball of weld up here. I'm guessing they lost their rubber handle, and that was their solve to getting something to grab. But we ground all that off, put it back to the way that it was, so that hopefully it'll accept a shifter ball. But you can see it clicks in really nice at neutral. Everything shifts in the way that it should, so really happy with how that turned out. I did find this is the original casting that was on this tractor. I did buy another fork housing casting, and I took some of the components out of it because it was better, cleaner. There was some differences between this fork and the fork that I pulled out of there, and I've got a picture of that I'll put up too. But the old fork, the one that was originally in here, was all worn out. So I went with this one. It made everything much tighter. There's no slop for that pin. So I'm much happier with that. And then this is not the original seat setup. So on 335s, they had two options. One was a comfort option, and the other was more of a utility option. And so this setup with this big rubber bushing was the comfort setup. This is still the original seat. The comfort seat was a big padded thing. I don't even know, but I know that this wasn't the comfort seat. So I did reuse the seat, and you can see that again we had some modification done. It was after grinding it all down and looking at the bare steel, it was rusting through where this is covering pretty good, so I can see where they would have put that on. But yeah, you can see that that's definitely not a factory thing. So that's done, and that's the setup I'm going to go with, kind of a Mod Podge between the two. So yeah, as I stated, for the parts manual, you've got this seat, which is a number 10 seat, foam rubber. Okay, and then you've got this seat, which is a number 17 seat, tip up. So that whole setup has got the rubber boot and the single stud. This seat had 3 bolts to secure it. Now this, the bottom of this housing had 3 bolts in it that would mount the same as what this does. They're flush, and they have just a flat screwdriver head in them, and mine were so rusted out that there's no way you're going to get a screwdriver on there, let alone actually think that they're going to turn. So that's why I went with the other cast ballast or transmission fork housing. So yeah, that's the difference between what it is, what it could have been upgraded to, and then the combination of both that I'm going to be running. And then I've got everything gear-wise ready to go. I've got my 80-90 weight gear oil ready to go back in. I've got gaskets pre-made for those 3. I ended up making them because they're pretty difficult to find, but not a big deal. Those 3 are made. I've got my bolts cleaned up and set out. So I had all 10 of the 1 1/4 for the transmission cover. I've got 6 1-inch. You can see I had to go with a couple of new ones, not because the other ones were that bad, but because for whatever reason, this is all I pulled out from what I had put away when I took this apart. So anyway, unfortunately, these aren't Rockford. It is what it is. So 6 1-inch for the back, and then these are supposed to be 7/8 for that front plate. I had 2 of the original 7/8, and again, I don't know where the other 5 ended up, but I'm going to have to go with 1-inch for the front, which will be fine. So they're all cleaned up. Both the bolt and the bolt hole have been chased with a tap and die, so threads are all cleaned up. It should go back together really nice. That's done. The front portion here I got redone in new Gliptol, so that's all recovered. And then eventually here I'll get the throwout bearing put in. So back plate is all cleaned up, ready to go. Front plate cleaned up, ready to go. So really the next step is to get that put on, get the new gear oil in, get that all sealed up and done. And then from there I'll move on to the brakes. I'll get the new brakes installed. I'll clean up the brake pedals, get those put back on. And then that'll be buttoned up. I'll get the throwout bearing on here, and then I'll get that covered up and ready for primer. And then that's about it for this. And it'll be ready to go under primer. I've still got a lot of work to do to the 3-point components. So there are the arms, and again, once I get them cleaned up, I'll show you some of the welds. But I came up with a theory that I think this thing was rolled at one point, and I have another theory that says if the gentleman that owned this would have spent as much on replacement parts as he did on welding rods, he probably would have been able to build 2 new tractors, because I'll show you what we found back here. So we've got a big weld there, and we've got a big weld there with a big chunk of plate that he put in to reinforce this drawbar. We've got more welding on the drawbar, so only a portion of this drawbar is actually the stock piece. So it would be this portion right here, and I'm guessing it broke off, and then we welded all the rest of this on there to build out a new drawbar that sticks out much further than it would have originally. And then again we plated underneath the other side of the drawbar, and I don't know if this was part of that rollover accident or if this was another series of events that led to this, but yeah, this thing has really been used, and used hard. And I could spend a ton of time going through and replacing the drawbar and finding new parts, and it's all still there. You could still find it and you could do it, but I think I've come to the conclusion that other than the manifold, which I already changed out, everything else that has been welded, that brake pedal, all of this, the 3-point arm, I'm gonna just paint and put back on and leave that as part of the character of the tractor. When I'm out at tractor shows talking about it, I can point it out and show people, and just, you know, it's part of the history. So I've pretty much opted that I'm just going to leave it alone. It's not going to necessarily be super functional, and I don't need it to be. So that's where I'm at with that. Yeah, so that will pretty much wrap us for this video. Next time you see it, I should hopefully have the brakes in, the brake pedals back on, the floorboards cleaned up, start working on getting everything hung, and then the last part before I get the primer gun out is going to be taking a look at this guy. Not super excited about what I could potentially find in it, but we'll take a look at it and get it tore apart, fix any of the seals or anything that I'm sure need to be done, and then we'll get that under primer too, so that when it comes out of primer, that's ready to go back on, and then we're ready to marry the engine back to the transmission and be a whole lot closer to this thing actually running. Alright, that's where I'm going to leave it for today. Thanks.